is present in the Council Chamber and all those watching online to this meeting of the Health Scrutiny Committee for Lincolnshire. For those of us in the Chamber, if there is a fire alarm, we need to leave the Council Chamber through the rear doors, through the reception and assemble in the car park at the front of the building and await further instructions. I would also request all members to place their phones on silent. To ensure everyone has the opportunity to ask a question, please ask a maximum of 2 questions per item, and to keep these succinct and concise. And I would like to remind you all that your comments will remain accessible online. I'd now like to move into agenda item 1, apologies for absence and replacement members. Jess.
Thank you, Chairman. We've only received apologies from Councillor Suzanne Welbury today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cleaver? Yes, we've got Councillor Morgan now. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 2, declarations of members' interest. This is an opportunity for members of the committee to declare any pecuniary or other interest. Do have members have an interest to declare? Rob?
Thanks, Chairman. And yet again, my declaration is that I'm a stakeholder governor of LPFT. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz?
Just to note again that I work for Lincolnshire and District Medical Services, and my interests are lodged with Health Watch as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In which case I'll now move on to agenda item 3, the minutes from the 19th of February. These are to confirm the minutes from the meeting held on that date as a correct record. They are found on pages 3 to 15 of the agenda pack. Is there a seconder for the proposer for those? Sorry, Councillor Mackinson Saunders, and a seconder, please. Councillor Kendrick. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's supported. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4, the Chairman's announcements. My announcements were included in the pack at pages 17 to 19, and my supplementary announcements were circulated on the 11th of March. Does anyone have a question or statement? And we can pick up any major discussions as part of the work programme item. Councillor Smith, please.
With your indulgence, Chairman, I do, but bear with me, my laptop has decided to now is an ideal time to update something, so with your indulgence, Chairman, I do apologise, it's now playing silly so-and-so's first thing this morning. And it's just loading up as we speak. So just
as far as I'm aware, the internet's on. And if I could just remind members to use the microphone just because it's online and to pick it up. Thank you, Councillor Irk.
Thank you, Chairman. My computer has now decided to cooperate. With regards to the announcements of the new GP contract, whilst the additional funding is welcome, it would be very helpful to know how this is being funded, as there is no magic money tree to print new money without any consequences. Additionally, the comment about booking online to avoid the 8 AM rush is already in place, and it still fails to resolve this issue for many working people around access, especially those that work early shifts in the morning. And secondly, Chairman, whilst the additional funding for hospices are also welcome, you and members may know, and we'll see the comments from St Barnabas Hospice in your report, and you will also know that Sir Edward Lee MP has been pushing for the Secretary of State to cover the national insurance increased costs for hospices so they can continue to ensure they provide the vital care that they do for those that need it the most. Would you, Chairman, be willing to write to the Secretary of State in support of Sir Edward Lee to also push that hospices are exempt from the national insurance increase? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, for your comments. I mean, in fairness, it would be a decision for this committee whether or not they would support that, and I'm not sure whether without some form of motion, I'll look to just whether or not we could actually take that on board. So, but if it's something that the committee is willing to do so, then most certainly we can pick that up and raise it. Okay, any other comments? No? Oh yeah, Councillor Mackinson Saunders.
Well, I think all the people I know in Louth will be delighted to know about the movement with the GPs. It is a problem for so many people, so it's good news. It's a shame it's not happening till October, but beggars can't be choosers, can they?
No, thank you for your comments, and we'll certainly watch this space and obviously keep a watching eye on it as it comes forward. Okay, any other comments on my announcements? No, in which case do we have a proposer to note these, please? Thank you, Councillor Mackinson Saunders, a seconder. Councillor Hayes, all in favour, please show. Thank you, that's supported. We'll now move on to agenda item 5, East Midlands Ambulance Service. This item was circulated as part of the agenda packs on pages 21 to 104, and I would like to welcome our presenters, Sue Cousland, Lincolnshire Divisional Director, Anthony Hodgkinson, Divisional Senior Manager Planning, and Murray MacDonald, Non-Executive Director. Would you like to present the report in about 10 minutes or so, and we'll take questions at the end? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Macy, and good morning, everybody. I am going to just take you very briefly to some salient points in the report. Apologies for the length, but the majority of those are executive summaries of strategies that have recently been approved by the Trust Board, which I thought you might find of interest. I think it's fair to say there has been an improvement in performance in Lincolnshire. We're delighted to say across a range of areas which we're happy to embellish a little further on, but we're absolutely not where we want to be. So please do take that on board. There has been recognition by the Trust Board that Lincolnshire used to be the worst performing division of East Midlands Ambulance Service. It's now by and large one of the better, if not the best, performing, which has been a significant turnaround over the last 2 to 3 years. We have no doubt that there is direct correlation with our ability to perform and respond to those most in need with the delays on hospital handovers, but we do have some positive news on progress, which we will work through shortly. There is a national focus on one particular target, and that's the Category 2 target, where we're expected at the moment to actually respond within 30 minutes. And certainly when I left our headquarters this morning, we were around 21, 22 minutes. So we were moving more towards the target that we need to be achieving. I would remind you, and I have said this before, that performance isn't everything, because a Category 1 performance of 7 minutes to get somebody in either cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest or with a significant hemorrhage is a huge achievement in a largely rural county. We can get there in under 7 minutes and the outcome for the patient could be unsuccessful. That would be seen as a performance achievement, but not by the family. However, we can get there in over 7 minutes, which would be a performance failure, and actually have a good outcome for patients. So just going through briefly, we last came to you in January. Since then, we've had a couple of executive changes on the board. That's detailed. I've put the national vision for the Association of Ambulance Chief Execs in the pack for you as well, and it sees ambulance services working with thriving systems to do more than respond to emergencies, and hopefully the detail in the pack indicates that we are doing just that with our system colleagues. Myself and colleagues from the group, so that's ULTH and the community services, have a workshop around integrated workforce at the end of March. So hopefully we're looking at pooling some of our workforce to be able to respond to the demand. The performance updates, I have to say, it's very pleasing to see performance going in the right direction. Anthony has more details on specific elements of performance, and also 45-minute handover procedure, pre-hospital handover, which has now been implemented in Lincoln County and also Grimsby and Scunthorpe hospitals with, by and large, a large degree of success. And we continue to work with colleagues there. We've given an overview on page 28 of the critical incident that was called by EMAS in early January. That was an absolutely unprecedented period of time where we had 268 outstanding Category 2 calls across the region with no resource to send. Not a position we wish to be in, but we have recovered significantly with the support both nationally and regionally from colleagues, both commissioners and providers. I'm very pleased with our progress on workforce. We've previously reported to you that skill mix is poor in Lincolnshire. So around 31 to 33% of our staff are registered. We're now up to nearly 40%. That is a huge achievement in the last year. Our attrition rate in Lincolnshire is below the regional average, that currently running at 6%. Again, a huge achievement because, again, I have reported to you previously that we have been losing staff. We are now retaining a lot more staff through various channels. Sickness, historically in Lincolnshire, we've been the best performing division for about 18 months now. We have a flexible and compassionate approach to sickness, but we also make difficult decisions when we need to. Best practice initiatives that have been developed in the division are now used across the trust. Efficiency is very high on our agenda. We all know that the next financial year is going to be extremely tight no matter where you are working. So we're looking and working very hard on all areas of internal efficiency. Our ambulance clinical quality indicators are included in the pack on page 31 so that you can see how we monitor the standard of clinical care delivery when we do arrive and treat patients. Any suboptimal care that is identified is actually discussed with the clinicians involved in order to improve practice and have an ongoing journey of learning. Moving on to page 32, we do have a professional support and learning structure that I've spoken to you about before. Now that is being adopted again across the trust, and I regularly attend those sessions to keep up my own registration as a nurse. We're looking at, we've got a trial on in our emergency operations centre, so our call centre at the moment, where we have a very senior community nurse who's looking at whether she or he are able to deal with patients in a different way rather than deploying an ambulance. Our pathway leads continue to carve an excellent channel in terms of bringing in new pathways of care that mean we don't need to deploy, or we have alternatives for patients that hitherto would have gone to a rather crowded emergency department. Reward and recognition, we had our event last week. 29 members of staff received awards for long service, which totalled 560 years, which I think is a phenomenal achievement. We have our people plan, and I draw special attention to that as Appendix E, which sets out actions related to feedback that we've taken through sickness, cultural and staff opinion surveys. The staff opinion survey for 2024, those results are, I believe, due out later this week, so we will review those. But I think it's really important to note that we have a 20% improvement in returns in 2023 survey. We are dealing, sadly, with an exponential increase in violence and aggression experienced by our staff. So we have body-worn cameras, and the encouragement is to use those body-worn cameras when necessary to do so. And we have a lot of cooperation with police colleagues, unfortunately, when those cameras have had to be used. We do sadly still have members of staff who are injured as a result of violence and aggression. All support is given, but we are working very hard as a trust to actually deal with that. Emergency planning on page 34 is something I've highlighted previously as quite a hidden aspect of the work that we do. And I think earlier on this week, on Monday, was a prime example of how certainly the division really stepped up to the plate. We deployed a large number of vehicles to Grimsby Docks, and we managed 36 casualties that were given to us, and not one of them was taken to an emergency department. And we worked with local authority colleagues and Port Authority colleagues to manage the situation that came out of the blue. We actually, and Anthony is a past master at this, he will drop what we call a no-notice exercise upon our duty commanders who are there to manage incidents. That's their raison d'etre. So we do that on a regular basis, not always popular. I have to say, but it really did prepare people very well for what happened on Monday. We do work very closely with the local resilience forums, both Humberside, which we've done very closely this week, and with Lincolnshire as well. And we also have continued to have extremely good working relationships with co-responders and community first response colleagues across the patch. Page 35 is just a collection of appendices that we thought that you would find interesting, hopefully not too much bedtime reading. In summary, we hope that you see that we are striving to improve, we are improving, but we're nowhere near where we wish to be as yet. Thank you very much.
All right, questions? Anyone start? Councillor Smith first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And this may be my reading of it, so please don't take this as an out-and-out criticism. I'm curious why, certainly from my reading, as I say, it took the employment of a divisional senior manager for workforce to create and establish the various workforce schemes to enhance the operationability of EMAS. Now, I may have read that wrong, and if I have, I humbly apologise, but that is what it seems to be as I read it, Chairman. And that to me is a concern, because surely that is something that an organisation such as EMAS, or such as any public sector organisation, or indeed any private sector organisation for that matter, you would want embedded within your own team naturally, rather than having to employ somebody to do that specifically. And could the presenters also go into a bit more detail about this role and what its long-term future will be? Because obviously I appreciate in the report, Chairman, it says it was done with external funding, as we all know, Chairman, as councillors, with budgets and things, external grant funding is marvellous until the government turn around and say, sorry, you can't have any more, sir. So it'd be very helpful to know a bit more about that role. But also it's a bit like the issue with when this was before as Chairman and I said, where's Matron? And Matron is there, but it now takes 3 people to do Matron's job. Well, that's not Matron, is it? That's something else with the same name. So it's a slight concern that this specific role was needed. And as if I've got that wrong, please correct me by all means. But it'd be very helpful to know a bit more. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Smith. And I wouldn't take offence at those comments, because I think it's a very valid point. What I would say is that we do have an entire regional workforce team who work tirelessly on recruitment. What we recognised in Lincolnshire, and what I've reported to you before, is poor skill mix, poor attrition, poor recruitment locally. So what we've done is we've used one of our existing members of staff who knows the county very well, so we've not drafted anybody in. They've worked with the central recruitment team on changing the way we recruit to get better calibre candidates, done a lot of work in schools, in colleges, around career pathways that are available within the ambulance service. So I'm comfortable that we recognised a challenge for us. That role has really proved worth its weight in gold. You're right, the funding will cease at the end of March, but we already have plans, because those pathways now have been embedded in division. That work will continue through the senior team, so we will lose nothing, but we have gained an awful lot from having the luxury of an additional senior member of staff focused on workforce. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. That is exceedingly helpful. And may I, because it's not clear in the report, may I pay tribute to you and the team for doing that? And it's good to hear, because a lot of organisations, Chairman, I think could benefit from doing the same, be that NHS organisations, councils, etc. I think, Chairman, that is best practice, which should be highlighted, because too often what happens is the requirements are rigid in a way that don't actually require them to be so rigid for the benefit of fulfilling that role. And what actually happens is local people who are passionate, who want to do that role, often get disenfranchised. So, no, absolutely, and thank you for the explanation. It's very helpful, and pay tribute to you and the team for doing that, and also on, as you've said, around the improvements, because they are huge. Since I can remember the last meeting, Chairman. It was quite a difficult one for yourselves and for us as councillors. So no, the improvements are noticed and very much appreciated, because I know it's a very hard environment that you're all working in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Liz?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your presentation, Sue. It was really helpful, and to commend your colleagues on the recent experience in Grimsby. I think we ought to take a moment to acknowledge that hard work. In terms of the report, it's really pleasing to know that from a Health Watch point of view and for patients that the handover time is reducing, so everybody gets better quality care, and those numbers are coming down. Is there any more that you're doing to try and drive that further? And if there is, could you let us know about that, please? Thank you.
Yes, there is an awful lot more that we are doing. We were talking earlier, and I'll bring Anthony in a minute, around certainly the 45-minute initiatives and post-handover, all contributing to our ability to keep more resource available to respond. I have to say, though, and pay particular note to our colleagues in the system, both ICB, so our commissioning colleagues, and our group colleagues in Greater Lincolnshire, for the way that we are able to work together. They have really taken on board the risk that the ambulance service holds on a daily basis, and have been working tirelessly to look at different ways of working, alternatives to emergency departments. So, Liz, I think you'll find there'll be a whole stream of initiatives coming through, but starting with some of that integrated workforce. So, are we using the workforce we have collectively to its best use? I would, and we would all say, perhaps not, but what does that need to look like in order to make sure patients who are all vulnerable get the right level of skill mix that isn't always a yellow box with a blue light on? So I'll hand over to Anthony for a couple more initiatives.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning, colleagues. In terms of the 45-minute handover process, what's really been evident is that system way of working and how we've embedded that with all those colleagues. And over the last few weeks and months, having almost daily meetings collectively to work out how we're going to go through this together, because absolutely it's a hospital initiative to improve their flow in their, across the acute sites, but actually we've got a big part to play in that in terms of our response and our colleagues as well. So those conversations and those relationships are really strong at the moment across the county. And we're really embedded now in terms of that. And we've seen at Lincoln County particularly, it's been live now for the last 2 weeks, and we've seen some great improvements in terms of the reduction in pre-handover delays, ultimately giving more time, obviously, for our resources to respond. As we move forward through the year, we're also looking at our clinical navigation teams that are embedded in both Lincoln County and Boston Pilgrim hospitals, in terms of redirecting those patients to the right place in the right time at the first time. So like Stu was touching on, it's not about every patient doesn't always need an ambulance. They need a form of response, and that's often a telephone call or a direction to an alternative service or provider. So our pathways team, our clinical navigators, are really focusing on that with our operational staff to make sure that we can direct patients to a more appropriate location or destination without touching the acute site, as it were.
Thank you. That's really reassuring to hear, and we look forward to the performance improving even more. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kendrick next, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman. A couple of questions. I was interested to read in the papers about some of the sort of case studies or initiatives, particularly the Isle of Wight Falls initiative. And would I be right in thinking that the EMAS specialist practitioner example given in there is something similar to that? Is it something you've either taken from Wales or the Isle of Wight, I should say, or is it something that's come out from your own investigations? And secondly, you occasionally see reports about the impact of morbidly obese patients being dealt with through the ambulance service, and has there been an increase in that sort of level of challenge, shall we say? And finally, if I'm allowed a third one, Chairman, being greedy, I was very interested and encouraged to see the success with staff retention. What particular initiatives have been done to actually achieve that? Because that's great to have such a success story there. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. So if I take them in reverse order, the staff retention has been a combination of a number of things, but I would say predominantly listening to staff. So why are they going? What are they going for? What is it that we need to do in order to retain them? Because a lot of staff were telling us that they didn't want to leave the big green family, but they felt they had to for career progression. So that links to your initial comment, your first question around specialist practitioner role. And we've just introduced the advanced practitioner role. When I first came into the ambulance service 7 years ago now, we were actually capped at a particular banding, so that's band 6, and a lot of other organisations were offering band 7 and band 8A, so that's career progression. We now offer band 7 and band 8A within the organisation. So the other thing that we've been doing is, and you will see it in the people, our people plan, is the increase in the number of appraisals that we've been doing. And everybody can have an appraisal that it could be a bit of a tick box exercise, but actually we like to do meaningful appraisals. We stand people down for periods of time when we're not as busy, not very often. Sometimes they do get cancelled for obvious reasons, but we listen to what people want to do. We have people who are coming to the end of what is and can be quite a traumatic frontline career, who actually want to stay on, don't want to retire, but want to do something less stressful. So our colleagues with our patient transport service, we're able to step people across and into, and they take with them a huge amount of experience that then brings on new members of staff in patient transport services to hopefully be the future paramedics. So it's looking right across the board, flexible working options. I think fair to say we are the division that offers the most opportunities for flexible working. That can be challenging because we still need to put out a 24-hour service. But again, if we can't meet a flexible working request, we usually find a halfway house where we can actually negotiate something that will improve work-life balance but isn't quite what the initial ask was. So hopefully that's the first and the third question answered. In relation to bariatric patients, these are patients who are normally over 25 stone. Yes, I think it's fair to say we do see an increase. But we have a good system with our police and fire colleagues in particular. If we don't know about those patients, they will tell us about those patients, and we're able to do a risk assessment in slow time should our interventions or an extraction from a property be needed in a time-critical situation. So we have a register of those patients that we continually reassess, re-review and add to all the time. It is an increasing issue, but I think when we look around in society, that's no surprise to any of us. But our vehicles do have the capacity. We can move our stretchers from one side of the vehicle and have them centrally mounted in a lot of our vehicles now, so that we're able to manage safely patients who are a little bit heavier than perhaps they used to be. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks very much. It's very positive. Interest in the thing about appraisals. When I was in the NHS, I always had, when I had an appraisal, I always used to seem to leave it with more work to do. And it seems to be that you have a much more positive approach in fact of listening to your staff. So I think that's great. So yeah, I'm really pleased. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I've got Sarah now.
Thank you, Carl. Just incredible improvement from what we saw last time, and I can only imagine the hours in the blood, sweat and tears that have gone into that, because that's throughout the organisation, from the management to the frontline staff down, and that's a lot of balls to keep juggling in the air, so well done. In my other role, with my other hat on, I am a funeral celebrant, which at times does bring me into contact with people who have had contact with your frontline staff. And I have to say that even when, obviously when they're with me, the outcome has not been, in their eyes, successful, but they speak so highly of the compassion and the care that your staff show in those situations, and they really, really do make a difference. There's one woman who I'm particularly thinking of who lost her 32-year-old son in Laos, and I'm sure she would absolutely be delighted that I've had this opportunity to relay that, because it made a massive difference to that family, and I think your staff should be congratulated for the compassion, but also the time that they spent with that family at that particular point in their lives. They must have felt that pressure to move on and that concern, but that in no way came across to that family. And it was extraordinary, actually, to listen to the story. And in terms of the staff, I am aware that dealing with those situations day in, day out must have an emotional toll. So what I'm interested in is, when you look at your sickness figures, are there any concerns that you have about mental health within your team? And what are you doing to kind of not just address those issues as you get to them, but promote good mental health and well-being in the team, in your teams, just on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for that recognition and those very kind comments, which I will pass back. So yes, thank you. In terms of the emotional toil, I think we are on an hourly basis aware of the incidents that our staff attend, some of which you can't even begin to imagine what might be going through their minds. They have families, they relate to all of that. We regularly monitor with our people business partners, so that's the new name for HR these days, but we regularly manage and monitor those people who are off with what we call anxiety, stress and depression. And we know through the work that we do is that a large proportion of that is related to things outside of work. That doesn't mean to say we still don't provide that same level of support. We absolutely do. And we do pick up people early. We encourage colleagues. You spend 12 hours in a cab with somebody. You know, we all work together. We all know when one person is perhaps not firing on all cylinders, and it is just that polite, "Are you all right?" And that makes a lot of difference. And actually waiting for the reply, standing around long enough to hear the reply. So I think we you know, there's always improvements, but I do think we have a compassionate leadership team right across the ranks that actually support and help staff when they need it. And I've always said, you never know when you might be the one that actually needs a little bit more time during the day. So hopefully that answers. It's something we monitor all the time. And when there have been particular tragic incidents, people are taken offline and they have an immediate, what we call hot debrief with a senior manager. And then they are referred on. Station managers have a very vital role to play in this further down the line, because it might not be affecting somebody at that moment, but they might go home, not have slept very well, come back into work the next day. Station managers are visibly looking for anything that they can do to help support.
So can I just ask again, in terms of that data about sickness, do you separate the data between those people who have got those musculoskeletal issues, illness and mental health? Are you aware of those figures separately for people who are off with anxiety, depression, stress? And are you concerned about them in any way, or are they quite steady?
We will always be concerned about anybody who's off for whatever reason. But yes, we do have those figures separately, and it does go down to quite granular detail. And again, with station managers, so we have 3 heads of operations who every week meet with their station managers and go through the sickness and absence in their locality. So we take it down to that level. But we're very keen to move on to the front foot more in terms of prevention. And our station managers have had additional training that we've purchased in division around providing a higher level of resilience in trying to help support others. We also have professional services through our occupational health contract, and also some very specialist services that we can access in cases of PTSD as well. So we have a whole range of services that we can call on should we need to.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Burke next, please.
Thanks, Chair. And Councillor Parkin has reminded me of the events on the 2nd of January when I lost my wife. And I don't think we thanked the ambulance service, but exactly as you described, the cared 2 teams worked extremely hard and were very supportive afterwards. So January the 2nd in Lincoln, Colgrave Street, I'd like to pay tribute to you for the work you did. Thank you.
If I may just come back, thank you for that. It means an awful lot when we feed that back, and I'm really sorry for your loss as well, but thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your report. You've given us so much information. I spent all yesterday afternoon reading it, Sue. Thank you. But I think a few points I'd like to pick up with you. On page 26, you say about hear and treat and see and treat. And obviously, by the stats that you've put there, you've cut down by about 50% in general, taking people to A&E, where they'd probably be sitting in an A&E for hours. So I think that's a good thing. And also, I was quite impressed with the people plan, where you picked up on your staff surveys, and you've actually put 19 actions into place from people's suggestions. And I think that's a great idea, because I firmly believe in the people that actually do the job, know the job, and know the problems, and come up with the answers. So I think that's a really good thing. Now, with your indulgence, I want to tell you a little story. On the 6th of January, we'd had a lot of rain, and my division was flooded. But unfortunately, I've got a sister-in-law who's disabled, and bless her, she'd fallen out of bed the day before, and her carers had rang me and said, "Oh, Linda, can you please ring the ambulance service?" Because they couldn't take her to our local UTC. So 11:08 on the 6th of January, when I understand it was chaos everywhere, I rang the ambulance on 111, and I rang again at 1600 hours just to check, because I knew there'd be a wait, how long the wait would be. And this delightful lady answered the phone, and she said, "Oh, I do apologise, but you could be waiting up for 12 hours. Well, that was great. I didn't mind. It wasn't an emergency as such. So I thought, right, it got to 10 o'clock. And I thought, I'm really shattered, I'm tired, and the carers will be coming in, so I'm going home. So I left a note on the door. Dear EMAS, and the time factor, and the patient is in bed asleep, and my telephone number. And I went home, and I got a rude awakening at 6 a.m. on the 7th of January. And it was a delightful ambulance man who was really polite. And he asked me the combination of the key lock, which I gave him. And they took my sister-in-law away to hospital. And, you know, the staff were so polite and so reassuring to me. I mean, in theory, it could have been anybody, but I knew it was an ambulance person, and I'd like to thank you for that. I know it was 19 hours, and she did have to sit in A&E for a little while, but she was treated very well. And I think that's about it. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really sorry. 19 hours is absolutely not what we were aiming for, but I think there was what I could only describe as a perfect storm, because that was the day we declared our critical incident. Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue also declared a major incident. We had difficulty in accessing because of the flooding as well as the higher levels of activity. So I am genuinely very sorry that you had that wait. I'm pleased that you did get a compassionate response when you did get one. But that sort of approach is hopefully going to be a thing of the past, because we're hoping to be able to deal with patients who have had a fall and been on the floor for quite some time in a different way, because we have a pathway that is now one of the first in the country, what we call a long lie pathway, whereas previously we would have to take people to an emergency department. Now we have a different way of monitoring and managing those patients without taking them to hospital where it's not warranted. So hopefully there's been some progress there, but again, I'm really sorry for that wait. The people plan, the engagement piece, I was keen to draw your attention to that, because we do a lot of engagement, we do a lot of listening. We have a monthly, what we call chatty cafe. So we don't go to stations anymore because staff don't spend time on stations. They are outside emergency departments. So we take a welfare vehicle with tea, coffee and biscuits, and we go and chat to them. There's no agenda. They don't have to come and chat to us, but invariably, it's like bees around a honey pot. If you put the kettle on and you've got a chocolate biscuit, you've got a captive audience. And that is where I'm able to listen firsthand to those people who know what it's like and know what's happening. And, you know, it is almost a case of you said, we've tried to do. So that's the approach that we've taken. So I'm really interested in the most recent staff survey results later this week, because I'm hoping that they are going to demonstrate a further improvement in that. And again, yes, the note that the area that you've noted, the reduced number of people actually going to an emergency department, and what our colleagues in the group are now calling EDs should be for life and limb patients only. There are other areas accessible for people who need a slightly different approach. So there is still an awful lot of work to do, but we've got some really good relationships building.
Thank you. Councillor Mackinson-Saunders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, you're doing something right with recruitment, because I'm surprised by the number of people that say they'd like to join your emergency service, and that's grown over the months. And so well done, you're getting the message out there. What I wanted to ask, because it's something I'm asked a lot, how do you decide where you're going to take a patient? Because a lot of people in Louth tend to go to Grimsby, and if you've had a heart attack, I think you'd probably prefer to go to Lincoln. Something cropped up at last month's meeting, and it's an ex-ambulance man that's now running the stroke service, and he said because of the lack of consultants in the stroke service, you might end up having to take people to Nottingham. And I was rather concerned about that, because if you're on the East Coast and you've had a stroke, and my mum had one, so I'm well aware of what happens with strokes, it's who decides who's going where. That time is critical for lots of stroke victims, isn't it? And I was quite alarmed by him saying that. And last night, surprisingly, I did meet somebody who'd been taken to Nottingham, and I wondered how on earth he'd ended up going to Nottingham, who had decided. So I just wondered if you could shed a bit of light on where you direct people to. Thank you.
Absolutely. Stroke is an interesting condition because there are many reasons that a patient will have a stroke, some of which are immediately treatable and time critical. One of those is if you have a clot, that has blocked a particular vessel, you need some extremely specialist care very quickly. That is Queen's Medical Centre. Yes. So, by and large, so it's the assessment is done by the clinician who attends the patient. They have opportunities to have further dialogue with other experienced colleagues as well to decide and agree the best treatment for those patients. So, and we have on the mobile phones and the iPads, so all of our ambulance crews have a personal issue iPad, so they have all of the pathways on that iPad that they are easily able to access. So it's the initial assessment that then guides that clinician as to the best possible outcome. And what we always try to do, even though Skegness or Louth to Queen's Hospital sounds a long way, under blue light conditions, it's not. We have airlifted where we've needed to as well. So it is basically a judgment call, time critical, who's the best place to help this patient the most. Because the alternative to that is to pick somebody up, take them to Lincoln, spend some time, and then have another journey. You're better off going straight away. So it is that initial assessment, guidance taken. Often we have a direct line into what we call the EPIC, so it's the emergency physician in charge of emergency department who we can discuss the patient with, and they'll say, bring them here or just go straight to. So we're able to have that dialogue as well. Hopefully that helps.
Just say you've had a heart attack, you can't say to the ambulance man, I'd like to go to Lincoln, please, if they're going to take you to Grimsby. That's an issue that comes up quite a lot.
What we need to do, and Anthony, whose substantive role is Regional Operations Manager, may wish to come in on this because I'm a mere nurse, but the rule of thumb generally is under those conditions, we take the patient to the nearest hospital that can manage that condition for safety. I don't know, Anthony, if you want. Yes, please do.
Thank you. I think it's important to differentiate what a heart attack is versus a patient suffering chest pain, because if we see a patient that's having chest pain, may or may not be a heart attack. So that would depend on which hospital they're going to. So if we saw you in your heart racing showed a heart attack, you would go to Lincoln because that's where the intervention is carried out. That we would take to the coronary care unit directly, and they go onto the table and have the surgery there. And then, if you're having chest pain, that an ECG is normal, you would go to Grimsby as the nearest emergency department to have the blood tests and X-rays to determine what's the cause of the chest pain. So I guess it's just important to differentiate in terms of what the actual presenting complaint is versus what we find when we've done a physical assessment.
Okay, thank you. I've got no further speakers, so I've got a number of questions myself. So my first question is on page 28.5. Can you advise what mitigations have been put in place to try and prevent a repeat of the critical incident, and how confident are you that these mitigations will work?
Sorry. We are confident with the actions that were put into place. So at 6 o'clock on the evening of the 6th of January, our Director of Operations asked for 3 specific actions to be put into place. So one of those was the immediate release of 5 ambulances from each acute hospital that was holding ambulances at that time. By and large, that was achieved, which was again a huge achievement. We then asked for 3 ambulances every 30 minutes to be released, and that continued. And the other element that we put into place was we held safely Category 3 calls overnight that were then sent to clinical assessment services the next day. So why are we confident that we're going to be able to prevent a similar occurrence? We've done a full debrief with recommendations. Those recommendations are being implemented. The final action that I've just described, that is now built in as business as usual. So that actually happens across the region to reduce the pressure overnight. And we do have processes in place and agreed with all of our acute providers for what we call an immediate handover. So if we have an uncovered Category 1 call, we can release a crew immediately. That is always in place. And then we have what we call a rapid handover process where we can ask the acute trust to release ambulances once certain criteria are met. And those criteria include levels of activity, numbers of uncovered Category 2 calls, etc. So there is a whole infrastructure built in behind. And one of the other areas that we are focusing a lot more on was the preceding weekend prior to the Monday that critical incident was declared. The number of pointers that perhaps when you look back with the benefit of hindsight, we're all building up to give us that perfect storm on the Monday. We've now got those indicators built into our minds. And I do a 1 in 5 strategic command on call for the region, as do 9 other of my colleagues. So we are acutely aware and are monitoring more closely those triggers. So.
Thank you. My next question is, under the vision for the NHS ambulance sector, how likely is it that the NHS both nationally and locally will adopt these ideas, and what feedback has been received to date?
I think it's highly likely that these initiatives will be adopted because, as I've mentioned before, it's about an integrated workforce is the way forward to manage the level of demand and activity that we're all experiencing now. So, and again, I draw to the first part of my presentation was around working with systems that are thriving. So I'm confident, particularly for Lincolnshire, and when I look across my other colleagues in other divisions, we are quite a bit further ahead with those initiatives already in terms of integration. Much further to go, cultural issues, but the boundaries that perhaps previously were in place 3-4 years ago are no longer there. We are one health system in Lincolnshire.
Okay, thank you. My next question is on page 75 under the heading Talent Management and Education. Could you expand on what your succession plan for hard to recruit roles is, and is it yielding results?
The appraisal process that I mentioned earlier is our way of talent spotting. We've had a lot of people who are now in successful management positions through a development opportunity. So they actually have the opportunity for 6 months to try a specific role, and it's almost a try before you buy type of approach, you know, because not all management roles are for people. They see a role, they think they might like it, but sometimes they don't realise some of the efforts that go in behind the scenes. So it's about talent spotting. It's about making sure that we, and forgive me for talking about staff in this way, but hopefully you'll understand it. It's about putting round pegs in round holes and making sure that we give people the direction and the opportunities that they may wish to aspire to. I've been lucky in my career, I've had that. And what we want to do is to be able to give anybody the opportunity to be the best they can.
Okay, thank you. My next question is on page 99, with category 2, 3 and 4 all still significantly off target. What new and innovative mitigations are being put in place since you last attended the committee? And do you feel confident they will deliver significant improvements, as wait time still to be one of the largest complaints I think I and my colleagues probably receive from residents?
Yes, and I think we've fully acknowledged the wait time and will continue to do so. The initiatives that we are working on are varied. Some are going to have more immediate impact. Some are going to take an awful lot longer. We appreciate that we are still a long way off with regard to the wait times that are reported for category 3 and 4 calls. But I think this is about working with the system to actually understand and assess these patients to make sure that is ambulance the first port of call. Very often it isn't or shouldn't be. So it's about how do we then work with system colleagues to provide access to other opportunities for assessment and treatment. So am I confident? I'm confident in the system being able to work together. Some of these initiatives, this is like I was going to use a slow-moving tanker, but maybe that's not a very good analogy to use, but I think you know what I mean in terms of turning all of this around. We're really chipping away at it. We're starting to make great inroads into category 2, and category 3 and 4 patients, I believe, will be dealt with very differently in the future, but with the influence and support of the ambulance infrastructure.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, you just popped in. You'd like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chairman. Very briefly, you mentioned flexible working. Now, I may sound quite old-fashioned and a bit of a fuddy-duddy, Chairman. In an organisation like EMAS or the Armed Forces, whenever that term is used, it fills me with dread. Because I sound very old-fashioned. My late father served over 22 years in the Royal Air Force. And when you join an institution like yourselves, or the Royal Air Force, or the Army, or the Royal Navy, it's not just a job, it's a lifestyle, it's a career. You expect to work unsociable hours, you expect to do X, Y, and Z, and it's not a normal job. Now, I appreciate if you can do things to help, you should, but are you finding that you're getting inundated with requests and it's actually impacting service delivery? Because that's always my worry, Chairman. I mean, one example I'll use, which is a military example, is there were reports saying, oh, well, we'll make it so soldiers don't have to work weekends. Well, I'm ever so sorry, but if something happens on a Saturday and the balloon goes up, we're not really in a position to say, oh, you don't have to come into work today. And much like yourselves as an ambulance service, you are a 365-day-a-year service for better or worse, which is why you often get inundated because our patient and our residents can't see other services, so they reach out to yourselves. It's just making sure that, yes, it's right to help people who work for you whilst you can, but it's not impacting service delivery, because that always fills me with dread whenever that word is mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So absolutely, flexible workings are on the increase. I think in any modern workforce, flexible workings, is what's attractive as an employer, and especially with a newer modern workforce, we are seeing an increase in applications for flexible working agreements. And it's about how we touched earlier on in terms of that compromise. So absolutely, when people join the ambulance service, you join to work nights and weekends and Christmas Day, and that's just part and parcel of the job, isn't it? In terms of how we deal with and manage those flexible working requests, if we can accommodate them, we will, because a big part of that is about the attrition and keeping staff and making sure that staff want to continue to work for us. But also, as we see with a new generation of workforce, it's about they're more career-driven, and in terms of what they want to get from their own career whilst helping the patients obviously being the end goal. So often we find that staff want to do a bit of this for us and a bit of that for another healthcare provider. If we can reach the compromise, we will. That's not always possible, and certainly we've had occasions in the recent months as it becomes more prevalent where we have to be more sure with the members of staff to say we can't do that, and it's about giving a clear rationale and a reason why we can't do that. We are seeing an increase, but we're about managing that within our realms. It's not currently a problem for us, and it's not impacting service delivery in terms of the outputs that we can see, and from the resource figures there. Hope that gives some reassurance.
Thank you. I've just got a further 2 questions, and that is on Appendix F of the report. It includes comparisons with other divisions, which appear to suggest that the Lincolnshire division is not performing as well as other divisions are. Does this suggest that Lincolnshire does not have its fair share of EMAS resources?
What we didn't include in the presentation, and happy to provide some data on it, is in answer to your question, we do have enough resource. What we don't have control over is whether that resource stays in Lincolnshire all the time. So 3-4 years ago, we were a net importer of other divisions' crews. We are now a net exporter. So there are some discussions ongoing at the moment on how we can protect and ring fence across all divisions without impacting upon patient care, to ring fence more the resource for division. So that's work that's ongoing, but it's noted, and we do have those figures, but we are working very closely with our commissioners to try to reduce the impact on division, because we have had a significant workforce and recruitment drive. We wish to retain those resources within Lincolnshire.
Okay, thank you. And my very final question, if all the hours of ambulance time lost because of handover delays were available, how close would the Lincolnshire division be to meeting national targets?
We've always said that Lincolnshire, given the rurality, is always going to struggle with the national targets. But if we look at category 2, 30-minute in particular, we know that when we've got turnaround, we have the right level of resource, our sickness is low, we can achieve 30 minutes and under. We're doing that today, we did it yesterday, and I have no doubt we'll be able to do it tomorrow, but it needs to have a combination of things that line up in order to be able to deliver that. Category 1 performance in Lincolnshire, 7 minutes, because we have no idea where our category 1 calls are coming in. They could be the other side of Brigg, they could be the other side of Spalding. So when you have between 45 and 55 ambulances out during the day, and you take a number of category 1 calls, you can never legislate for that. So I wouldn't wish to give false promises, because that would be completely unrealistic. So, but please be assured that we are trying our level best every single day to achieve as close to those targets as we can possibly get. And the internal efficiencies that we're working on will help us to improve the level of resource even further to respond.
Okay, thank you. I've got no one else wishing to speak. Oh, Councillor Mackinson-Saunders, I'll allow you in for the final comment, and I'm going to move to a proposal.
I was just following on from what you were saying about resource. Is there any way this committee can hammer that home? Because we're always, we're usually the poor relation, aren't we? All things that are going on, and we don't want funds going out of Lincolnshire or any resources going. So is there anything we can do today to back you up to ensure this isn't going to happen more and more?
That's a really kind offer, but I think those discussions are already underway in EMAS and are very well noted by the board. And we're working as a group of divisional directors to try to ensure that we can ring fence as far as possible. But then when you have a major incident, you know, it's all hands to the pumps. So, you know, you do have to take a measured view with all of this, but we would like to reduce, and we're working actively to reduce that export of our crews out of Lincolnshire.
Okay, thank you. In which case I'm going to move to the proposal that the presenters be thanked for their comprehensive report and attendance at the meeting, that the continued collaboration between the East Midlands Ambulance and local acute trust on reducing handover times be supported, and our thanks go out to all EMAS staff for their continued hard work. And finally, that a further report be presented to the committee in the new county council term. Do I have a seconder for my proposal? About 8, so thank you. All in favour, please show. Thank you, that's supported unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 6, non-emergency patient transport service. This item was circulated as part of the agenda pack on pages 105 to 117, and I'd like to welcome our presenters in person. Tim Fowler, Assistant Director of Contracting and Performance for the NHS Lincolnshire Integrated Care Board, and Joy Weldon, Head of Non-Emergency Patient Transport for East Midlands Ambulance Service. Would you like to present the report in about 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll take questions after, please?
Thank you, Chair, thank you for inviting us back today. I'll take the report as read, and I just want to highlight a number of issues as I go through the presentation. We've updated the report from the data that was presented to the committee in November. We've covered service delivery principles in section 2. We've updated on rebeds and satisfaction measures in section 3 and included complaints in section 4, and we've also updated in terms of the eligibility assessment in section 5. I think just taking the report holistically, there are some key themes that are coming out of it, and I want to draw those out as we go through. If I concentrate on the service delivery principles, I think last time we said that we were looking for improvement. We've had improvement in some measures. We've not had improvement that we expected in all of the measures. I think the two that we are most concerned about are 2-hour discharge and fast track. Both of those are off track. They're not delivering what we want them to. 4-hour discharge has improved and is now at its highest level at 84%, but still not meeting target. I've agreed with Joy that we will do a deep dive on 2-hour discharge and see if we can get that radically improved, and that will result in an action plan. We got some really tricky, really sticky issues around 2-hour discharge, and we need to concentrate really closely on that and see what we can do to improve it. I'm not sure it's going to get to 90% quickly, but be assured, please, that we are, both ourselves and EMAS, are going to put a lot of attention into this and see if we can get it to improve. We've noted in the report that we've been through winter pressures period. That creates issues for us in both 4-hour and 2-hour discharge. We've also had the critical incident, which Sue was talking about, EMAS and 999 talking about, and that creates an issue with resource. But we do now need to get to the point where we've got a real understanding, real deep dive into what's going on with 2-hour. Some of that is hospital process. We've had a pilot in at ULTH, Lincoln County, and Boston. And there are some quite interesting things coming out of that in terms of the way the booking process works. But where we have 85% of on-the-day discharges being called for within an hour of the booked time, that's a really difficult impact on the metric that we have in terms of 2-hour discharge. So we want to do some work with the hospital on that, and we are starting to do that now. In terms of fast track is small numbers, and we've given the detail on fast track. Disappointing that we didn't hit it for November and December and January. All of the patients that were on fast track had their journey fulfilled within 4 hours. That's not good enough. We need to get this sharper, and again, we'll bring that into the deep dive. We've got provisional data for February, and for February, fast track was 100%. So I just want to reassure the committee that we are really focused on that. In terms of the incentive scheme, so where we are with rebeds, we've seen an improvement in rebeds despite winter pressures over the last 3-month period compared with the previous 3-month period. And that's probably a good news story, and that shows the focus on the kind of key issues that we face within the service. Friends and family and the text messaging and paper satisfaction remains around 90%. That's consistent, that hasn't improved, but it is showing a slight upward trend, and that's quite a good news story, I think. I don't think that will, in short term, improve greatly, but 90% is something that is really favourably comparable with the previous provider and favourably comparable with other PTS services nationally. If I then move on to, we've mentioned in the report Health Watch and the work that EMAS has done with Health Watch. We've had a Health Watch report into both EMAS and the ICB. That came through last Friday. That creates a number of issues that we need to look at, and we have said to Health Watch that we will respond to that more formally within 20 days. There are a number of issues in there. Some of those we're aware of, some of those we weren't previously aware of. Some of those are anonymous, and we'll go back to Health Watch and see if we can get detail of those individual patients, so we can actually pick up the detail of that. I think we do get from Health Watch a summary that comes to us each month during the year. And where I've had issues escalated to me, we have looked to support those through EMAS. And there's one in particular which got escalated to me. That's an individual who had a number of journeys failed. And what we've done is we've put particular attention into that individual to stop that happening. So where it is escalated, we do try and sort it quickly rather than wait for an end-of-year report. Complaints are where they have been consistently. So we've had 6 formal complaints in the 4 months to December. There are 78 PALS concerns. That's probably what we're going to run at as a run rate now. And we've updated in terms of eligibility. There's about a 3% rejection rate for eligibility, which is common with other PTS services nationally. I said I'd draw out some key themes as we went through. Discharge, absolutely, 4-hour discharge, 2-hour discharge. Eligibility seems to be a bit of a concern that's coming through now. We do follow the national eligibility criteria. That is, and we said last time, that is set for us nationally. And EMAS have an algorithm that they use to check that. Where there are representations made on eligibility, sometimes that gets escalated to the ICB. There is a clinician within EMAS who can look at that and check the eligibility. So we do have processes in there. I do think we need to tighten up on some of the feedback that is given from call handlers to patients when they are talking to EMAS. And again, we'll include that in the deep dive. And I'll leave it there and take questions.
Thank you. Do I have anyone? Yep, Liz.
Thank you, thank you, Tim, and thank you for acknowledging the feedback that you've had from Health Watch and that you're going to provide us with a response to that. You mentioned, obviously, the eligibility criteria, and I know it's national eligibility criteria, and you also alluded to the fact it's more about the feedback for the caller of what they do if they're not eligible, I think, is the issue that Health Watch have found. So it will be helpful to know how that's going to be managed in the future. Thank you.
Just on that point, we've done a lot of work based on the feedback and have a directory of services, but also so that gives us all the information around what's available in the communities for people and for individuals. And some of the feedback then talks about a patient then directly contacting those services, but what if they can't help? And so what we're looking at now is then, so how can we help and support individuals? And so looking at what we can do to work with community providers more directly so that we can support patients in a way in terms of the communication element as well, because sometimes that can then prove challenging, and then the person may not feel that they can come back to us to talk about that and to look at what we can do to support. So we have got some work around that, and also there's a new post that we're looking to fill for the next year going forward, and that supports very much so the volunteer schemes that we have anyway in PTS, but also that link between ourselves and the community services around what's available and how we can bridge that gap as well, so that we're comfortable and happy then that when we have signposted to another service that it's happened, that you know that patient's then got that follow-up support.
Sorry, thank you. I think that would be really helpful because it's kind of where does the patient go next? So yeah, appreciate that move forward.
Do I have any other questions at the moment? No? Okay, I'll start with one myself. On page 106, I welcome some level of improvement with the service delivery principles, but discharges collected within 2 hours and arrivals for all patients within 1 hour are still way off target. what new and innovative approaches are you now taking to address the significant issues in the coming months?
Yeah, so absolutely right in terms of those measures. So, so from the time frames just outside of those is where we're seeing those targets being nearly met. We're not really far off. And so what we've got currently is we've got the discharge pilot that's identified some really key themes and trends in terms of making improvements from booking and quality of booking, educating our system partners, because there's a lot of old ways of working, old thought processes and how things used to be, and we're also allowing increasing use of our systems so they can get more information, we can get the right information. We've got a trial role at the moment, so this is around calling ahead. So we, as routine, try to call patients ahead of time so that we have a reduction in those aborted journeys, so the waste where somebody doesn't need us and we don't necessarily know about that. And so we've got, and part of the pilot, we've had some trial people to just specifically do that piece of work, so that the crews can then just get on and manage their day and collect their patients. But we can then also establish if somebody's needs us or not, and so it saves that journey, because what usually happens is if a crew member can't get hold of a patient, they still have to go to that address because somebody may need us, and there may be some injury or somebody being unwell at home. But if that patient's then gone with a friend or a neighbour, or it causes us a lot of wasted downtime. So we've had that role, and that's looking at being successful, and so looking how to implement that. And also from the measures, we've also had our first month of improvements of those wasted journeys where patients have made their own way, and so they've booked us, but they're not necessarily used us. And so we've did the campaign, if you can remember from last time, around informing people to just let us know if we're not any longer needed. And that's working really well. And that's also from a hospital perspective as part of the pilot scheme, working really well in terms of us having that real-time interaction with key wards and areas in hospitals. So that's reducing as well. So lots of work ongoing. We're not where we need to be with all of them, but we're making some real sustainable changes so that we can make this, it may not be as quick as we'd like, but what we want it to do is to be sustainable.
Okay, thank you. I still haven't got anyone else raised, so my next question is on page 110, the final paragraph. Can you please expand on what those challenges were in the call centre and what has been done to improve this, and how you are monitoring and supporting improvements?
Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to find that. So we faced challenges where there's obviously the road network, so where somebody chooses to go to another location as well is quite key. So what happened during this visit was a patient lived in Lincoln, could have gone to Lincoln County, but chose to go to Grantham instead. And so what happened through the visit was, all this day-to-day interaction the quality team could see. There's choices that patients make about where they'd prefer to go, and we don't know that. So when we take the bookings, we take the bookings on face value. That's where the patient needs to be seen, and don't know that there's an alternative for that. So that does provide us quite a challenge. in other areas as well. I mean, we nearly 5,000 miles we travel outside of county, particularly that in January. Just to give you an example of the mileage that we do for specialist hospitals, so where the treatment is specialist and isn't delivered within the county. So when you add on patient choice for local treatments that can be delivered within the county, it's quite difficult to be able to manage that, and it creates quite a it's a lot of time difference as well for people to travel from Grantham, Lincoln to Grantham, when it could be a few minutes round the corner.
I think the point about, if I come in, the point about flow out of county is really key for us, and that creates a number of issues, and that's linked to patient choice. Patient choice is a national initiative which allows individuals who have elective care to basically choose anywhere in the country. If they're then eligible for patient transport, EMAS are obliged to take them, and that's difficult. That causes us increasing complexities within the service, and it's one of the things that we're very conscious of as a ICB, as a commissioner. We've always had a national, excuse me, my voice is going, we've always had a natural flow out of the county to Peterborough and to Grimsby and Scunthorpe. We have a flow to King's Lynn. We have a flow for specialist services, as we've heard earlier, to Nottingham. That's appropriate. But where people are having elective care, we have increasing flows going beyond those boundaries, beyond the natural flows that we've had. And that does create issues for managing the resource. If a vehicle is going out of county with a patient for a 4, 5, 6 hour journey, and that's a one way, it's then about what do we do with that vehicle? Does it stay there and wait for 2 hours? Or do we send another vehicle 6 hours there, 6 hours back, collect the patient? So it's a really tricky issue that we've got. In terms of the quality visit to the call centre, I think I mentioned when I was presenting the report, there are improvements we can make with the feedback to patients from the call handlers, and we are looking at that, and EMAS are very conscious of that, so that's what we will do.
Thank you. Councillor Burke.
It's gone on. Thanks. Just really interested in this patient choice scheme, which I take it the government has brought in. Given you seem to be talking about quite extreme decisions, really, rather than on personal patient choice, rather than medical decisions. Somebody choosing a 6 hour drive at taxpayers' expense. I hate to sound too conservative about this, but is it reasonable, in fact, for you to feed back, or perhaps for us to feed back to government, questioning, is this scheme beneficial? I can see advantages, but I'm just worried if that's putting an unfair burden on your staff and patient care.
So the scheme is designed to improve elective waiting times. So that's what it's there for. So if there is capacity in, I don't know, Norwich, for example, a patient may choose to go to Norwich and they may get treated more quickly. In general, the patients who are accessing under right to choice are going to private hospitals. If it's an NHS commissioned service, which it will be, i.e. NHS is paying for it, if they are eligible for patient transport, we need to provide the patient transport. That's what the regulation says to us. So there's some really complex and sticky issues in this. I think in Lincolnshire, are we comfortable that the principle of using capacity where it is available is correct? I think what we're seeing is that patients are choosing to go to a number of hospitals that we wouldn't normally have as a flow. So where it's local hospitals, it's probably a good thing. Obviously, and I don't want to get into digressing into how all of the flow around elective care works. But in terms of the patient transport service, we need to make sure that we are working to the regulation where patients are eligible. But it does create an issue for resourcing. And if a vehicle is out of Lincolnshire, it can't be redirected to support discharges. So we're trying to grapple with that one at the moment. There is something in the eligibility criteria that says patients should be encouraged to make their own way. And what we're trying to do is encourage for those longer journeys out of area for patients to make their own way if they can. I think generally patients who have that longer journey would look first call to patient transport rather than make their own way. So there's lots of complexity in this.
Thank you. Haven't anyone else indicating, so I've got another question I'll ask myself. At the top of page 109, the report states that the ICB has financially penalised EMAS for not delivering the agreed target. Can you share with the committee how much this penalty was? And with many service delivery principals still not delivering for patients, is the ICB likely to be penalising EMAS again in the near future?
So in terms of rebeds, we manage that on a quarterly basis, and we will do the calculation up to the end of March, and I'm happy to share that detail with the committee. No issue in doing that. In terms of the service delivery principles, financial penalties do not work. They're not applied in the contract. I think we've had the discussion here before. They're not applied in the contract for non-delivery of a service delivery principle. In the HTG contract, you may remember that they were. So we've moved away from that. What we have is the local incentive scheme, which again we've explained here. And we will do the calculation again when we get up to 31st of March. We will do the calculation, do the work on the local incentive scheme delivery. And I'm, again, more than happy to share that with the committee at that point in time. That may or may not result in a financial penalty to EMAS. We need to do the work on it and see where we get to. But more than happy to share that.
Thank you, that'll be helpful, I think. And my final question is page 112. The report refers to the fact that 29% of the appeals affecting 90 patients between April and December 2024 were allowed. Can you provide reassurance to the committee on that the eligibility criteria are applied fairly to patients in Lincolnshire?
Yeah, the criteria is applied fairly. We have a number of questions that we ask all our patients who call in. We also have systems in place where there's perhaps someone who hasn't previously been eligible, for example, and we'd had an example recently for a Health Watch concern. So where somebody would normally go with a family or relative, they were able to make their own way. However, their relative had been in hospital unable to drive, and so there was a temporary request for us to support. And so we'll also apply additional factors when needed to support people. It's a national criteria. We apply it across all of our PTS services, and we don't always get it right. We do have an appeal process, and when people appeal, there are times where the clinician will uphold the decision, but there is also times where the clinician will then explore further the medical need of the patient and then override the initial decision made based on human factors. But the application is applied fairly to everyone. There's also a piece of work that we're doing as part of the discharge work in terms of when somebody's making a booking online, so a healthcare professional makes that booking directly as well, and ensuring that they're applying the process and criteria as we would do to ensure that patients that are booked through the online system are also eligible, and so that again that application is fairly applied for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Tim, just on the point you were mentioning with the Chairman there around the fine, Can you expand on that a bit? Because it, to me, isn't clear. Because as you've said, and we had quite a, shall I say, lively discussion on that issue last time around the contract, and there are no penalty clauses essentially. So how does that work in practice? Because to me, that 2 and 2 aren't making 4 there. So I don't know how EMAS can be fined for something where you have no penalty contractual clauses. That may be my lack of the contract understanding, but that to me is slightly not making sense there. The other point, Chairman, it again goes back to your previous question around the criteria. Somebody I used to assist, who's sadly passed on now, I used to assist him with this, and the same issue came up again and again, because on the face of it, you put in, oh, he can do that, he can get it. He couldn't, so he had to appeal every single time. I think he needed it about 4 or 5 times while we were assisting him, and he had to appeal every single time. So how is there something in place that stops the same person with the same reasons for refusal having to appeal again and again and again? Because I've seen firsthand that happen, and that's obviously very distressing for that person, and obviously it's taking time away from somebody who needs to look at that appeal when it's already been through the system once and it's been granted. Because he had it granted 3 times, and I think on one occasion had it refused, and nothing medically had changed whatsoever. So, and I've still never understood that to this day, so it'd be very helpful just in case it comes up with other residents, if that could be elaborated on. Thank you, Chairman.
So if I respond on the issue of fines and how that would work, and I'll ask Joy to respond on the eligibility. What we've got in the contract is a local incentive scheme. That local incentive scheme is designed to take a holistic view of the delivery of the service across a number of dimensions. And if the measurement of those dimensions does not meet a standard, then there is a loss of income to EMAS. That loss of income is on a sliding scale, and it can go up to 10% of the contract value. The dimensions that are in the local incentive scheme are rebeds, and we manage rebeds on a quarterly basis, so it's unmitigated rebeds, and we transact those penalties on a quarterly basis. There are 2 other aspects to it. One is healthcare practitioner and patient satisfaction, and we've got patient satisfaction mentioned in the report. And the other one is a report on social value. That will be produced in a report that comes to us in April from EMAS. We will take a view of that within the ICB, and then we will work out whether we need to provide a penalty, invoke the local incentive scheme with EMAS. Now, I accept that if you're used to hard performance measures, where if it's a target of 50 and it's 51 that is delivered, or 49 that's delivered, there is a hard fine. That's not how we've constructed this contract. We wanted to construct the contract and the penalties in the contract based on that more holistic view of what happens across the service. And I know we've had the discussion before, but it tries to get into what is it that is important to us in the ICB. What's important is not necessarily having 2 patients who are over a 4-hour target. What's important is those 2 patients over the 4-hour target, do they feel that they've had a good service? Do they feel their experience has been appropriate? Have they had good support from the staff on the vehicles? So it's getting into that kind of patient satisfaction, healthcare practitioner satisfaction, rather than having a hard target that has a penalty. With all due respect, Councillor Smith, I don't think we're going to, you and I don't think we're going to agree on that approach. So, but I'm happy to have a conversation with you outside in terms of what the philosophy is behind that, if that would help.
Okay, Councillor Allen. Come back. Yeah, no problem.
About did you want me to answer about the eligibility? Yeah. So, well, firstly, I'm sorry that had happened, and for us, we went back to look at how simply we could do this, because you're right, you know, from somebody putting in an appeal to then it being processed, and we've had a discussion around that before, so that's enabled us then to take that feedback away, and so within our booking system, we are able to highlight now that when an appeal has taken place, and that the journey and the following journeys are to happen, and that patient remains eligible, and where somebody isn't eligible, the note is taken out of the system. So hopefully that then stops that repeat and duplication of effort. But also as well, we're looking and have implemented, so we're just getting feedback on that in terms of how we ask the questions as well, because sometimes some of the patients as well would say, everybody wants to be as mobile as possible, and almost kind of underplay perhaps how much they require the service. And so sometimes that happens, and so by the time we've had the conversation, the patient themselves have taught themselves almost out of needing us. And so we've found that a little bit as well. So we're trying to ensure that the way we ask questions, the way we kind of digress into a little bit more detail is also in place as well. So lots of work, and again, if there's any feedback, then we would welcome and review things.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to come out. That's very helpful, because in that case, that they weren't, because I appreciate you changing them, they were not easy to get that individual to, as you say, you don't want to admit you need help and there is a problem, so that's very helpful. On the point you make, Tim, that is interesting, and I'll word it in that manner, because that to me sounds very much, and I'll use IMT for an example for us, Chairman, that sounds like a pain and gain metric, which, principle, no issue with. As you say, we probably will never agree on the substance of it. My concern is, and I accept, not to have, say, an entirely arbitrary target of, well, you're 1 minute over, there you go, you get fined, but you need a level of cut-off where, in my opinion, where, okay, it's 4 hours, you were an hour, but that's why you were an hour, you've got mitigation, okay, we're not going to fine you. But if you're 3 hours, whether the patient's had a good service or not, they've still been sat there for 3 hours in excess of, and I appreciate there's operational things, but much like our pain and gain metrics for our contract, we have mitigation protocol that IMT and our other contractors can use. So where we have that conversation, we can say, actually, you're not being unreasonable, this has happened, so in this instance, we're not going to fine you, even though you've breached contract. So if that's what's being done, that's fair enough. But just to go on patient experience, to me is a concern, because it's not a very British thing to complain. You don't really care by that point, you're home. What matters, and the people who you don't want to complain, because you sit there and think, it's not the individual who's been in the back of the ambulance with me or the transport with me, because they've helped me, they've done everything they can, it's not their fault. So you don't want to complain, because what you don't want as an individual is that to go and reflect on them as individuals, because that is the last thing you want as a patient, because actually they've looked after you really well. The problem is you've been sat there 3 hours, which if in your metric there is a mitigation criteria and that's what you employ, fair enough. But if there is an absolute arbitrary thing of, well, even though you've been 3 hours and there's no mitigation, we're still not going to fine you, that's where my concern is. And I appreciate you probably can't have that detailed conversation with me now, but I'd very much like to take that with you offline, because it'd be very helpful.
Very happy to have that conversation. Very, very happy to have it.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been trying to keep quiet this meeting, as it's my last one. But I can remember that we had a good discussion on the contract, the new contract, when it was put to us at the beginning of fairly early on in this session. And I think we did raise some concerns about moving away from the more traditional sort of KPI type contract onto this service delivery one. One thing that I was looking forward to seeing was something that actually showed how more effective the new contractual arrangements were in terms of patient outcome than the old one. And we haven't got that, I'm afraid. We've got something that shows what is happening now, but it doesn't really provide that comparison between what was happening and what is happening. And that's disappointing. But accepting that we can only go on what we're provided with, I do wonder, bearing in mind some of the performance aspects under the new contractual arrangements in terms of patient delays in response to the 1 hour target and the 4 hour target, exactly how much financial penalty has been made within the contract so far? Are there figures that could be provided? Because performance is not very good. Whether it's better than it was, I have no idea, but it's not particularly good within the contract, that particular aspect. So has there been any penalty raised?
So we have raised and transacted penalties on rebeds. That is about, from memory, and I will confirm the figure, but I think that's about £6,000 per quarter. As I've said, in terms of the local incentive scheme, that will be a calculation, an assessment that we do following the end of the financial year, and very happy to share that assessment with the committee.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Allen? Or?
I suppose it's the only comeback I would come back, Chairman, is it's £6,000 on what element of payment that's actually being made, because it may well be useful to the contractor to take that penalty.
Yeah, of course you can. I don't think we're going to get that clarification, but I would have thought, like you say, £6,000 is an absolute drop in the ocean. It's hardly any sort of incentive to improve, is it? Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I've just got a query because it's patient transport, non-emergency, and I have used the service, but it's perhaps we've got a vision that it's all ambulances, but it's not, is it? Because I've been travelling in a private car by a volunteer, and the service I was given by that person was excellent. I mean, they even walked into the hospital with me to make sure I got to the right place for my treatment. But at one stage, through the system, you have to ring in early, but I think there's so many days before your due date, and I'd been transported for a few times, and then I was made ineligible, and that was on a question where I was asked if I could walk. Obviously, I'm not going to lie and say, no, I can't walk, because I can walk. So I have been contacted by EMAS, and I was given an apology, which I appreciate. But that was really upsetting at that time, because I live on my own, my friends work, and ironically, I have a hospital down the road, but my treatment was organised where I had to go to Boston. But fortunately, further along the way, my treatment was transferred to Grantham, which was great, because then I didn't need any transport. I mean, in theory, I could have driven to Boston, but then I couldn't drive home after I'd had my treatment. I just wanted to establish the fact that you do have volunteer cars. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for indulging me.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We have a number of vehicle types and a number of teams within our service. And our volunteers are a real integral part of that. And as I touched on earlier, that community role and the engagement role around increasing our volunteers is really key for next year in terms of growing that team further. Really helpful when patients are particularly going for a period of time, a treatment over a set period of time, that they then usually get the same volunteers in that area and establish a bit of a relationship, a bit of a rapport, and particularly for our patients who go for renal dialysis as well, they find that really helpful. So for us, that's really key for making and supporting with some of those improvements as well around the service delivery principles in terms of growing that team further. And I can recall the last time we had the conversation around that. where you became ineligible, and also as part of that, and as part of Councillor Smith's question, is that we've also within the system we've expanded the time frame for when somebody can book with us, so that we've increased that from a 7-day period to beyond that now, and also when somebody has a set treatment time frame, that patient is eligible for that set period of time, so that you don't have to keep calling in and going through the process when there's a particular change or anything. So we're really working hard to be able to kind of meet the criteria, however, apply where there's specific needs of patients, that we meet that as well in terms of what is it they're going in for treatment for.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Morgan left.
Thank you, and apologies for my late arrival. Hopefully this hasn't been asked before. With regards to the qualifying criteria, if somebody's refused transport, what sort of right of appeal do they have? I am very mindful, I have had a resident who lived in Ancaster who was a recent amputee, and I was amazed to find out that they actually were required to get buses, public buses, to Boston for their treatment. And I just wondered, I couldn't believe that someone like that had been refused transport. And I just wondered if there is an issue like that, what is the appeal process? Do people know about it?
I don't know about that case in particular, so happy again if outside of this that you want to share that, but I would suspect that that's already in our system. There's the criteria is if there's a medical need for us to support, and we've recently had a case around that. So you know, sometimes an amputee can actually get themselves around, don't necessarily need, you know, they can use wheelchair taxis, etc., which they would do in you know, a lot of people do in everyday life. So unless there's the specifics around that case, I've not been able to answer it specifically, but if they require our support to be able to get, you know, into the vehicle, into the hospital departments and things, then that patient would be eligible. But it's difficult to go through the detail without knowing, you know, the history for your constituent, which I'm more than happy to go through. But it is very individualised. So some amputees will be fine, and others may need our support. And so we would determine if that support is required as to whether the patient is eligible or not.
Yeah, but what is the appeal process if there is an issue?
Sorry, I missed that bit. Yeah, so at the point of call, if the patient's ineligible, the call taker will immediately offer if that patient would like to appeal the decision, and then that appeal then goes to our clinical lead to review and get back to the patient, to talk to the patient further, to explore in detail the need for transport. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have no further speakers, so I'm going to move to a proposal. I'd like to propose that the presenters be thanked for their reports and attendance at the meeting, that the marginal improvements in the service since the last report in November 2024 and the high patient satisfaction rates be welcome, but the committee's view that there is still extensive room for improvement against the targets in the service delivery principles be noted, and that a further report be requested in the first 6 months of the new county council term. So I have a seconder for my proposal, please. Thank you. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's supported unanimously. Thank you very much for your attendance. Okay, I'd like to move now to item 7, the quality accounts. This item was circulated as part of the agenda pack on pages 119 to 130. Each year, certain providers of NHS funded services are required to prepare a document called the quality accounts, which is basically an account of their quality of care and plans for improvements. I'll hand over to Simon just to walk us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as has been said, every March this a similar paper to this is brought to the committee. Last year, the committee prepared statements on 4 quality accounts, so EMAS, Northern Lincolnshire and Goole, North West Anglia, and United Lincolnshire Teaching Hospitals. Those statements were provided to the Trust and put in the published quality account, which has to be, I think, submitted online by the 30th of June and published by the 1st of July in each year. So it is an account of the quality of care, not a financial account. It is a little bit difficult this year because I am aware that there are events taking place with the committee sort of, in a sense, not holding meetings, but I would still ask if there are anyone who would wish to get involved in the process to consider that. In terms of the selection, I have included the priorities for improvement in Appendix A, and I've also included in Appendix B the most recent CQC ratings to help the committee in terms of selecting which providers the committee would wish to go for. So the plan would be a working group, meeting online over Teams, perhaps 2 meetings all in all, but I think we could be flexible with the membership if particular committee members are more interested in another provider, in one provider compared to another. Thank you, Chairman. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Before I bring in Councillor Allen, I would just say we just need to bear in mind that, as we've said each year, certain other health scrutiny committees do look at areas outside, such as NWAFT and so on, and we do try and concentrate on those areas probably that most affected us. I would always start with probably East Midlands Ambulance Service, due to the reasons we've had this morning, and of course United Lincolnshire's Teaching Hospitals Trust as it is now. I think the 2 most important ones to be looking at, though of course LCHS and LPFT haven't had their CQC report now for quite some time, so it may well be worthwhile looking at them as well. But I'll open it to the committee. Councillor Allen first, please.
Chairman, I agree entirely with the comments you just made in relation to how this item is dealt with. It's a question for Simon to a certain extent, because I was looking through the information in the appendix or annexes, I'm not totally sure which it is, appendix. And to be honest, I saw an awful lot of woolly stuff there in terms of priorities for the coming year, which surprised me a little bit. Fairly low level priorities, I almost thought, as opposed to many of the significant things, that must be testing the various trusts in the county. But the regulations regarding the quality accounts say that they have to provide 3 or more priorities for improvement. Well, I've made comments about that. Progress on the priorities for improvement in the previous year, which I would have thought would be quite important in terms of how well they've done in terms of what they said they were going to do the previous year, and then a range of different sets of information, including the Care Quality Commission inspections, which we've got a paper on it, but there's a range of other things as well, which were quite useful in terms of actually saying, is improvement taking place? Is that information going to be provided as well? Because at the moment it seems to be solely, these woolly priorities for the future.
Yeah, to be fair, the quality accounts, there's a lot more information to them. I think they just put out that heading, and obviously it's normally reflective. We'll look at what their priorities were last year and what they're putting forwards for the following year, but I'll bring Simon in.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the priorities, the regulations just refer to at least 3 priorities for improvement, but they don't actually then say that they have to be measurable in a sort of an easily quantifiable way. A substantial part of the quality account will be reflecting on the priorities so how they've delivered the priorities in the year that has passed. So that will be included in each document and is a standard part of each document. What I've summarised in Appendix A, or what I've pulled out in Appendix A is the words in their document relating to the priorities that they will be reporting on, and perhaps some of those are not as clear as others, and the metrics for some of them are not included in the document that they put forward. So last summer when they put the document forward, there wouldn't necessarily be metrics in relation to the priorities that they stated, but there hopefully will be metrics in the report. And some of them are very clear about whether they've met the target or not. Other quality accounts, you don't necessarily get a nice straightforward phrase, met or not met. And I think this is where each provider has a degree of, there's a lot of scope in how they interpret the guidance and perhaps the regulations on how they present these. You know, so just for the sake of it, North West Anglia, they, there are 10 priorities for improvement that they've listed. So they go into quite a lot of detail about what their priorities are, and they will provide a lot of detail in their quality account on those metrics. But others will just go for the minimum 3 priorities and perhaps not so much detail. But as I say, it's not a science. It's really, and I think it's an opportunity for the committee to provide comments on those, because they have to be published verbatim, so they have to be copied and pasted. So a statement of up to 1,000 words has to be included in the published document coming out in July. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Simon. You almost covered my point at the latter part of the statement you just made. Luckily, we only have to write 1,000 words.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Mackinson-Saunders.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's essential we look at North Lincolnshire and Goole Hospital Trust, because it provides services for a lot of the north end of East Lindsey in particular, and also for bits of where Councillor Smith's residents live too.
Okay, thank you. I mean, when it comes to the end, if that's supported, that's certainly one we'll take on board as well. So, okay, I've got Councillor Smith next, please.
Councillor Mackinson-Saunders beat me to it, Chairman. That is what I was going to touch on for the exact reason that she has alluded to. And also, as you know, Chairman, we sat on the scrutiny panel for the review into the services provided there and the ongoing issues that has, shall I say, laid bare before us. So I think it's pertinent. And I am very happy, Chairman, given that I am requesting it, to put my head above the parapet and volunteer, which is only right and proper. But no, I think it's very important, given the acute services review and the issues that are there, and the fact it also, Chairman, hasn't been it was last inspected in July 2022, and that's a long, long time ago, Chairman. So I think it's only prudent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I've got that down for when we take names at the end and everything else. So I've got Councillor Morgan next, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to support members' recommendations regarding North Links and Goole, but I do think it is important we look at LCHS this time round. I think and it's interesting that that's got end-of-life care as a priority, as has UNHT, and I think it's understanding how they mesh together, because we've got care in the hospital and we've got care at home. So how is that working? And I think also we've got concerns around dementia care, which comes under the Links Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. I think it's really important we understand what's going on there as well, especially with the potential closure of some of our dementia beds. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, no problem. Like I say, I think that it's worth looking at that, but not necessarily something that they are quite stringent, the quality accounts, and you don't go sort of down a rabbit hole with some of it realistically. So I think just to be aware of that, like Simon's alluded to, you know, some only choose 3 to go with, and it may not be that one of the areas you think it should be there is there, but we can certainly raise that. Any other comments? No, in which case, oh, Councillor Burke, I apologise, you did raise.
Sorry. This is more in the way of a question, if I haven't lost it. Oh, here we go. Yes, I can't see it. It talks about alternatives to A&E in there. And we've previously discussed, haven't we, pharmacy services, those sorts of areas. So I'm just wondering, have we done enough on this? Maybe you think we have. Or is it an area that needs some continuous review? I asked the question. I'm half persuaded that we've done enough on it.
Yeah, I think pharmacy services is probably not something that would actually, although it might be mentioned within quality accounts, it's probably not something that we will look at as a quality account. It's not an area that would be covered. Though, of course, I think it's going to be something that's moving forwards on the work programme anyway in future, because it is definitely something that continues to, especially with all the changes, need to be looked at. So take that on board. Thank you, Councillor. If I have no other questions or comments, I'm now going to be looking for agreement. So what has been put forward is NLAG, EMAS, LPFT, LCHS and ULTH. Are we all in agreement that that's the ones we'd like to? Yeah, okay, that's supported. Thank you. Now I'm looking for volunteers to take part. Now, as Simon's alluded to, you wouldn't necessarily have to take part in all, but I think what would be useful is just to see who would be interested in taking part in any, and then Simon will put the email out and take it from there. So I've got Councillor Morgan, Councillor Smith.
Are we doing it on Teams?
It'll be on Teams, definitely on Teams. Yeah, Councillor Mackinson-Saunders, myself and Councillor Wotton. Okay, thank you very much. I think that's agreed. Okay, in which case we'll now move on to agenda item 8, the work programme. Simon, over to you again.
Thank you, Chairman. The work programme report, I'd like to draw the committee's attention to pages 132 onwards in the pack. Slightly different looking to the usual thing because there's a list of items without dates. So I'm working on the slotting these in. There is now, I think it's a 12-week gap between this meeting on the 12th of March and the 11th of June. And that being the first meeting in the new county council term. But these are the items on pages 132, 133 and on to 134 that the committee has previously been interested in over the last 4 years, and I would expect to be included in the new work programme. So I think I've got everything on the list. I just checked. I was worried that I hadn't included the Humber Acute Review, but it is there on page 133. So they're all there to be picked up, and I'll be slotting those in a work programme. I don't know if any members have got any comments or I've missed anything. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Allen.
I think it's a very good way of dealing with it for the moment in terms of having the sort of, the items of interest as opposed to trying to slot them into dates. And it's very good to see that all the old things keep reappearing, and no doubt will continue to reappear all the way through the next 4 years as well as the preceding 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it certainly has for the last 8 anyway. Councillor Mackinson-Saunders.
I know this is going to be elections, so I just want to say thank you very much for your chairmanship to Mrs. Wooten, to Simon, and thank you for making me feel so welcome as when I first came to this committee. I found it really, really useful, and if I can keep banging the drum for East Lincolnshire, I will do. But thank you all for all your help that you've given.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, much appreciated, and I think we're all agree on that. Any other comments? Councillor Morgan.
It is a real question. One of the, from all the work we've been doing with the community, One of the requirements that keeps coming up is with the restoration of the good old-fashioned convalescent home. And I'm very mindful we kind of keep going over what we've got. Is there ever an opportunity to say, what about what we haven't got, but people feel we need? And it seems to fall between the stools, because obviously it's a kind of combination of healthcare service provision and also potentially housing or social housing. But over and over, whenever you say to issues like bed blocking in particular, or people being released early and care in the community issues, the convalescent home comes back as an answer. And I just thought I'd put it out there and see what do we think about that? Is there any way we could perhaps look at that, or ask our health providers if they could look at it?
I think the great difficulty is, and Simon will correct me if I'm wrong, it falls under adults committee and not this committee, and therefore it wouldn't be something we could look at, because that's the structure that's in place at the moment. It would fall to the county council's own committee for that, and obviously that's where the split does tend to happen, and we have that. We can certainly sort of look at, and we have looked previously at where there has been issues of bed blocking from the hospital side, but not from the adult social care side. That's just not our area that we cover, I'm afraid. So. But I'm sure it'll be picked up with Hugo, who no doubt has already got it on his committee moving forwards. Simon's not along, so yeah. But yeah, thank you. Anything else? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to bring the meeting to a close. I just want to thank you all very much for the last period of time you've been here with us. It's been my absolute pleasure to be the chairman, and thank you for your support, and thank you to Simon for everything he does. He does a fantastic job for the committee. And also thank you to Linda for all her help and support over the period. So thank you very much. It's been fantastic. And of course, to Jess, who was always doing sterling work. So thank you all very much. I'll now bring the meeting to a close, and good luck in the elections if you're standing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.